Hello, ladies and gentlemen, this is the previous jingle you used to hear. And this is the new Feel the Pedal podcast jingle. Welcome back, everyone, to Feel the Pedal podcast with new image, new jingle, and new format. It's been a while since our last episode with Dr. Mark Evans on exogenous ketone supplementation in cycling. I apologize for getting away of our usual episode scheduling, but it has been more difficult to conciliate work and my PhD research since coming back from holidays, but hopefully things can gradually stabilize and we can come back to our usual schedule. Nevertheless, I've been working in secrecy to renew the podcast image jingle, and I really wanted to celebrate this comeback with a very special guest for you guys listening out there. And I don't think there's a better way of doing this than having the person who, in my view, has probably contributed the most to the field of sports nutrition applied to cycling, as well as a researcher in several areas of performance nutrition-related research, as Dr. James Morton. As you all may be familiar, James is a professor of exercise metabolism and nutrition at Liverpool John Moores University. James's specific research interests focus on molecular and cellular responses of human skeletal muscle to acute and chronic exercise and the impact of diet and nutrition on modulating these responses. To date, he has authored over 130 research publications in the fields of sports nutrition, physiology, as well as metabolism, and numerous books and book chapters on these topics. In addition to research, James also works in elite professional sport in both sports physiology and nutrition support roles. From 2010 to 2015, he was the performance nutritionist to Liverpool Football Club and also specializes in providing nutritional and conditioning support to a range of professional boxers, MMA athletes, and jockeys. You may also probably know that James was also the head of nutrition for Team Sky between 2015 and 2019, having led the nutrition strategy for the 2015, 16, 17, and 18 Tour de France victories. He is also the director of performance solutions for science and sport. This episode will have two parts in which we will discuss on part one the challenges that James faced when he started working with Team Sky, the basic aspects that normally are less talked about, such as logistics, planning and coordination with team staff, which constitute a vital part of the groundwork of performance nutrition in pro cycling. On part two, we will get more deeply into the specifics of nutrition while on Team Sky and also the research contribution that James has been performing so far. So today we will tackle part one and pretty soon we will launch part two. So stay tuned to that continuation of today's part one of the groundwork of performance nutrition in pro cycling with Dr. James Morton up next on Feel the Pedal podcast. Good morning, James. We did it. This is finally happening. How are you doing, James?
Yes, very well. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure and an honor, James, to have you here on the show. It's been difficult on both our sides to try and manage to coordinate everything, but we are finally here. And running a podcast on cycling nutrition and having James here on the show or not having him would be almost criminal. So for that, James, thank you so much for joining me here today and taking the time for doing this.
No problem.
Okay, so we are actually recording this 2 days before the second edition of Barcelona Sports Nutrition Conference, and we are both flying to Barcelona in a few hours. James as a speaker and me as a listener, of course. Have you started packing, James?
Not yet, no. Not yet. I still have to finish my talk, actually.
Yeah, me neither. So let us move along with this. So, James, I believe most of the listeners, I think, are of course aware and familiar with who you are. But just in case there is someone who might not be familiar with you, could you please tell us a bit about yourself, your background, and how did you end up working with professional cycling and some of your research as well?
Yes, yeah. Well, I'm actually from Belfast originally in Northern Ireland, but I moved to Liverpool in the year 2000 to do an undergraduate degree in sports science. And I've never left. I've been here ever since. So I progressed to a lecturer. Just recently, I got promoted to a professor in exercise metabolism. But probably throughout the last 10 years, I've also worked in elite sport and professional sport. Started off in combat sports, and then I spent 5 years at Liverpool Football Club from 2010 to 2015. And then for the last 4.5 years, I worked with Team Sky, and I just left right before they changed to Team Ineos, actually. I probably wouldn't regard myself as a classic sport nutritionist, actually. I started off as more interested in exercise physiology and sport physiology. And as we did several studies, and I quickly learned of the role of nutrition in changing physiology, then I became more interested in nutrition, so to speak. But I would definitely say that I'm a physiologist at heart. And probably most of our research in Liverpool centres around weight-making sports, team sports and endurance sports. But we try and cover it from all different angles. So we will do research on skeletal muscle and the mechanisms regulating training adaptations, but we will do research right through to ways we can assess dietary intake and behaviour change and so on. So we're trying to really encompass many aspects of sport nutrition, but it has to come back to the core business of improving people's performance, really.
Very well, James. And on this episode, apart from having you here talking about all the more obvious nutrition-related topics that listeners are probably expecting to hear from you, and hopefully we can get to that in a minute, I thought it would be great to have you here sharing your expertise about not only your early times on Team Sky, but also all the logistics involved and the human part of this job, especially the relationship and coordination with all the team staff members and people on the backstage that are also a vital part of any cycling team and are usually forgotten or are less noticeable. So, James, I'm genuinely interested in knowing how was the transition from football to elite cycling. How was the nutrition viewed in the world of cycling back then? I believe we are talking about December 2014. Correct me if I'm wrong here. So what challenges did you find in terms of the specificity of the sport itself, coordination with team staff, and maybe to earn the trust of the people around you? What can you tell us about your early times on Team Sky?
Well, I think like many sports, they're all grounded in their own culture and their own way of doing things. And of course, I'd come into cycling with no experience whatsoever. I'd come in from 5 years of football, professional football. And I guess my biggest challenge or my biggest fear really was getting respect from the staff and the riders as to why should I be working in an organisation like Team Sky when I had no cycling experience. So I spent a lot of time just getting to know people really and why they thought about things the way they did and why the sport viewed things the way it did. And then, so I really worked hard in those first 6 months of trying to build relationships with all of the different staff right across the team, from the carers to the sports directors to the coaches. And I really made a conscious effort in those first 6 months.
And is there any particularly funny story you remember from your first days with Team Sky?
I don't know about funny stories, but I think what I probably struggled with to start with was the sheer amount of travelling that you have to do. Because of course, cycling's a sport where you're on the road all the time. I mean, I probably averaged between 100 and 150 days a year travelling. So it really took me a long time to adapt to that fast-moving, dynamic way of life, really.
And after getting into cycling and getting to know the sport a little bit better, how physically demanding would you say that cycling is in comparison to other sports? I mean, the perception you had before getting into cycling, and therefore the role that nutrition may play here in comparison with team or skill-based sports. Did your idea about cycling changed since you went to Team Sky?
Oh yes, absolutely. I mean, I really do believe cycling is one of the greatest sports in the world, and that's a big statement for me to make from someone that had no cycling experience. But having spent pretty much 5 years in Team Sky and had the experiences that I've had, and worked with some of the athletes that I've worked with, and seen how hard they suffer every day in training on the bike, and how professional they are, and all of the little details that they consider, I've got a completely new respect for the sport.
Would you say that things evolved since then? I mean, in the way that pro teams now look at nutrition?
Yeah, it's interesting actually, because quite a few of our PhD students in Liverpool are now employed on World Tour teams. And I think nutrition is really getting taken a lot more serious now than what it was 5 years ago. As you know yourself, a lot of teams back then didn't really have full-time nutritionists. It was more left to the doctor and the chefs and
Yes.
and even some of the carers and their beliefs. And that's the philosophy of some of the teams was really just based on the culture of the sport.
Mm-hmm.
I think, look, it's not. I don't want to come across as arrogant to say that Team Sky has made a difference in the sport from a nutritional point of view, but I think a lot of other teams have probably seen the attention to detail that we put on nutrition and have now tried to replicate in their teams and their models.
I believe we probably needed this, James. We needed a team that came up with this attention to detail and to set an example on how seriously nutrition should be taken. And I believe that the example that Team Sky might have given also influenced other sports as well. And probably we could say that Team Sky gave a major contribution to put sports nutrition on the map. And how seriously do you consider that nutrition is taken now in Team Ineos compared to how it was before your arrival at Team Sky? Do you believe that your presence there and interventions set a new course of action inside Team Sky's strategy?
Yeah, again, I don't want to sound arrogant or anything, but I think the facts are is that nutrition in cycling can be the difference between winning and losing, and it can take a good rider to a great rider. And we've seen that in the last 4.5 years. We've seen riders really improve their performance because they've changed their dietary habits. And so now nutrition is an integral part of the performance team. All of the coaches, the sports directors, the carers, everyone in my time there really bought into what we were trying to do. And we spend a lot of time educating all of the staff on the different protocols and why this drink was important, better than this drink, and why this recovery drink was important, or why we were changing the amount of carbohydrate on this day versus another day, and so on. But in the end, everyone almost really got to the same level, and they pretty much knew the nutritional strategy and the philosophy of the team. And that was because we all got aligned and we all had a shared vision and shared goals of where we wanted to get to, which I don't really see happening in many other sports, if I'm being honest, from some of the sports that I've seen. I think that was the difference with Team Sky, was that we all got round the table, we all told each other how we felt, and then off we went in the same direction.
How about the riders themselves? Was it difficult at the beginning to earn their trust and perhaps debunk some more deep-rooted ideas that they had?
You know, I didn't really find it that difficult, to be honest, with the riders, especially the British riders and the riders who had been through a coaching program, so to speak. I found the athletes very easy to approach and talk to. They were just like real nice people, good people, and they wanted to get better at their performance. So for me, it was very different from football because, of course, in football, you can't really see the difference between winning and losing when it comes to nutrition. But in the cycling world, the cyclists already know what a difference it can make. And so they were just more receptive and open to new ideas from any other sport that I'd worked in, actually.
Yes, and how about new riders who came into Team Sky? Was it difficult to have everyone at the same level of nutrition knowledge?
Yeah, well, that's a good question, because the honest answer is that everyone, when it comes to the riders, weren't at the same level. And of course, why should they be at the same level? Because in a 30-rider team, every rider has different jobs and every rider is at a different stage of their development pathway. Some riders are racing to win, other riders are racing to support winning, and some riders are simply racing to learn how to support or to learn how to win. And so therefore the level of service and the level of conversations that we provided to each rider was different depending on where they were at that journey. More often than not, I tended to spend most of my time with the guys who were going to win the races, really. And so some of the development guys who had just come into the sport, we were having very different levels of conversation with them than what we were with the likes of Geraint and Chris and Michael Kwiatkowski, for instance.
Mm-hmm. That's something we don't hear much about. It's that the nutrition strategy may actually change with different cycling specialties. And during the same race, some of them are racing to win. Some of them, as you said, are racing to support the leaders. And how much does nutrition change between cycling specialties?
I'd say one of the biggest differences is obviously body composition, where of course the climbers have to be on weight to win a race. If a climber isn't on their optimal race weight, it's very unlikely that they will win. Whereas a rouleur or a classic specialist or your classic domestiques, a kilo either side probably isn't going to make that much of a difference. Whereas for a climber, 1 to 2 kilo either side is, again, the difference between good and great and winning and losing. So body composition was massive. But I think one of the differences that I learned from moving from Liverpool to Sky was at Liverpool, I'm not sure if I truly impacted performance. And what I mean by that, and I think a lot of practitioners in team sports do the same thing, is we provide a generic service. And so every player in the team is kind of exposed to the same service. Whereas at Team Sky, we had clear performance plans for each rider. And so therefore, everything that we were doing was tied back to performance for that individual rider. And I think then I quickly learned how you actually really impact performance, but how I just understand performance now a lot more than what I did 5 years ago. And that's credit to the management team at Team Sky, especially Dave Brailsford and the coaches, and in how they dissect every little detail that can go into winning. And that's probably my biggest learning, actually, from the 5 years that I was there.
That's great. And since you've mentioned Dave Brailsford, how important do you believe was his impact on this new vision of including and probably elevating the world of sports nutrition and cycling?
Well, it wasn't just nutrition, really, Gabriel, because Dave, when it comes to performance, Dave's one of the best in the world, no doubt about it. And so he invested everything he had in every little detail that could potentially make someone go faster. Now, when you've got a boss like that who's really behind that philosophy and he quickly recognises the role that nutrition can play, then very quickly everyone is going in the same direction. And so, again, I don't think I would have been able to deliver the service that I delivered if it wasn't for Dave's belief in me, but also Dave's belief in nutrition. And again, that's a big difference from a lot of other sports teams, is that sometimes the people in charge don't really see the value that nutrition can bring, whereas Dave really did.
Yeah, that's great. And what challenges do teams that don't have a sports nutritionist may face compared to those who do?
I think it's critically important. One of the principles that I try and abide by now is the concept of knowledge times delivery. And what I mean by that is that I'm pretty sure that many people listening to this podcast have the knowledge of what it takes to deliver a nutritional service. And so the knowledge is taken care of. However, it's the delivery that makes the difference. And so if someone like Chris Froome or Geraint Thomas is crossing the finishing line and it's day one of a 3 or 4 day block in the Alps, if he doesn't recover well in those first 2 or 3 hours after day one, then performance is likely to be compromised on day 2, 3, and 4.
Sure.
And so therefore the delivery and having someone available to make sure that the riders are consuming the correct amount of food at the correct amount of time is absolutely fundamental to guaranteeing or attempting to guarantee an optimal performance.
Let's stick with that phrase. We can have the knowledge, but it's the delivery that makes the difference. I love that. And by delivering that adequate nutrition in the recovery period, for example, as you've said, we may be guaranteeing an optimal performance for the next crucial stages. I believe this is a great point to be taken from this. And James, most of the listeners who are familiar with you and your work know that you've been and you are still making a huge contribution to sports nutrition related research. Do you feel that in some way your experience in pro cycling had an impact in your career as a researcher? Would you say that your research interests and following publications were somehow molded by your involvement with cyclists?
Yes, 100%. I think the best questions will usually come from the athletes and the coaches. And your insights and your experiences that you see day to day. And certainly the things that I've seen in my time in the sport definitely helped me formulate some research questions.
As I understand, and you've mentioned about your very busy traveling schedule, being a nutritionist in pro cycling, it may not be a full-time job, as we nutritionists are not always present during some major races. In your particular case, you were James Morton, the full-time professor, James Morton, the researcher, James Morton, the husband and father. And how did you manage to have things under control all the time? I mean, how much time did you spend with the riders and staff previous to a big race, for example, for a Tour de France, in order to plan for everything in advance? And what key aspects would you prioritize?
Yeah, well, I don't think I ever had things under control, to be honest. But it's no secret that Team Sky was a Grand Tour team, so we were always focusing on the Tour de France primarily. And what that means then is that preparation for the Tour de France usually began in October time of the preceding year. And we would start having conversations because, of course, the route gets announced pretty soon. So we would start having conversations of the demands of the event and how the route was different from the last year's. We'd start thinking about what riders might be suited to this particular route. Then in December time, we'd have pre-season camp and we'd start thinking about the optimal race programs to get every rider ready to race the Tour de France. And so most of my time was actually spent around the Tour de France program, which meant therefore that I would try and travel to the races where the Tour de France long list would be. So the first 6 months of the year was really spent traveling to the races where those riders would be, as well as the training camps. And so really you're all on a journey then. Everyone who's potentially in that Tour de France team is working for that race for 6, 7, 8 months, and you all progress and learn at the same times. And things that would happen in one race, you would take into the next race, and that might be a big learning point, or whatever's happened on a training camp could be a big learning point. And slowly but surely, as we started to get towards May, June and July, and then everyone's attention to detail and level of performance, riders and staff, all just got taken up a notch. And that was the intense time. It was the real intensity time. And you can't sustain that intensity all season round. But again, for those 2 to 3 months before the Tour, everyone was full gas, just living and breathing the Tour de France. And that's why that team wins, because when they commit to winning something, for sure they'll win it, because they know how to win. What Team Sky does better than any sports team that I've seen is the planning element. They were just brilliant planners, but also brilliant reflectors and reviewers. So we would be reviewing every race, every training camp, every performance, and what could be learned for the next race. And so it was just that whole mindset was contagious, that every day can be better than the day before. And everyone just really bought into that. It was a journey that everyone was on to continually improve, riders and staff.
And as you've mentioned before, Team Sky had riders from very different countries and cultures. Just to cite a few, Sergio and Sebastian Henao, and current Tour de France winner Egan Bernal from Colombia, Elia Viviani, Gianni Moscon. Spanish listeners will be more familiar, of course, with Mikel Landa and De La Cruz. How challenging was it to adapt nutrition strategy to such different cultures and habits? And did you take these habits and perhaps even different foods from their own countries into account when building the nutrition plans?
Yeah, we tried to. Truth be told, I probably didn't do as good a job with the Spanish and Italians as what I did with the British type riders. And it wasn't down to me not understanding the culture. It was simply more of a language factor, the fact that I couldn't converse fluently in Italian and Spanish. And so my biggest tip actually for anyone that wants to really go into this sport and have a real long-lasting career in it is to try and learn different languages. From the nutritional point of view, the biggest difference, of course, as many listeners will know, is that Spanish and Italians love pasta and they love breads. And so their carbohydrate preferences would be different from the British type riders, and they've probably got more of an allegiance to carbohydrate foods than what the British riders did. So we did try our philosophy was, as it's well documented now, carbohydrate periodization, but it was certainly harder to get those European guys to buy into it the way that the British guys did.
Yes, and we certainly love our coffee, which is a problem in many other countries. Especially we, the Portuguese and the Italians, for example, we suffer here a lot in Spain with the coffee. So I imagine that this could also be reflected on many other foods, especially on carbohydrate sources preferences. And we've been talking a bit about the importance of the vital staff members working in the backstage, and in this particular case, soigneurs in the UK, I believe they're called carers. Just how important it is to coordinate with carers, in order to apply race nutrition strategy to manage all the logistics involved in the planning of a Grand Tour race. The drink preparations, the meals, the musettes, the recoveries. How do you get into this level of coordination, and how important are these people in the race success?
Yeah, well, those guys are absolutely critical to a race day performance. And of course, the logistics and the good practices at training camps. I really can't sing their praises enough, and especially at Team Sky, because those guys have been in the sport for such a long period of time. But they were always willing to try new ideas and listen to new ideas. When I went into the sport, I quickly realised the role that these guys played. And so I worked hard to just really become friends with them, to be honest. But I liked their company. I loved listening to their stories, and they were just all good guys, good, funny people. So we all got along well. But when it came to the logistics of organising a race or races, because of course we could have a race in France, Italy and Spain at the same time. So you might have 3 different teams on the road in any one week. So it's kind of like a team of teams. And sometimes what happens in a race might then impact what happens on the next race. So we were constantly reviewing all of our protocols. We would turn up for every race, and we would make sure that we would have plenty of meetings before the race started to ensure that everyone was crystal clear on the protocol for that race. Mm-hmm. And then if things changed, then we would have conference calls and make sure again that everything was updated for the next race. So it was an evolving process, but by far the most important thing was dialogue. And that dialogue meant getting everyone responsible for race day delivery together and ensuring that no one left that room until they were crystal clear on why things needed to be delivered the way they did. And again, it seems like it still amazes me that a lot of sports teams don't have those conversations and those joined up conversations and getting everyone aligned. And that's what we just did that. It was just embedded in the culture that everyone had to sit around the table and ensure that we were all aligned on what we were delivering.
Mm-hmm. Of course, I have an absolute respect for carers and all the people helping in the cycling team. From the small experience working with the lower categories that I have, just seeing how vital these people are, I can only imagine the decisive importance these people may have on World Tour categories. And another topic I'd like to get into, James, is the traveling during multi-stage races, which I believe that sometimes can be challenging to meet nutrition goals while guaranteeing food safety and even sleep disruption, which can ultimately be detrimental to health and performance. Was this an issue? Was this something that you used to consider important while on Team Sky? What sort of basic considerations regarding nutrition for traveling did you use to advise riders and even staff to take into account to minimize such risks while traveling?
Yeah, I mean, it's a real crucial performance area, that. But the thing that we did most was ensure that we had good practice hygiene protocols in place all of the time.
Great.
And that hygiene extended well beyond the team. I mean, it's no secret that we didn't shake hands with staff. We used to fist pump people instead. We all had our own hand gel. Anytime we touched a door handle or a surface, we were constantly sanitizing our hands. We had our own kitchen truck, obviously, so we could guarantee the quality of the food that we served every day, but also the environment of which that food was being stored, prepared and cooked. Sleep was a massive component, especially in the Grand Tour. So we would go ahead to the hotel, we would clean the room, all of the handles and surfaces in the room. We'd have blackout blinds, we'd temperature control the room, we'd have the correct mattresses and pillows. We'd try and ensure that we slept on a floor in the hotel that was far away from the noise. So it was all of those little things, but actually they all make a big difference. And in the end, we very rarely had anyone getting ill at Grand Tours, staff or riders. And a lot of our teams, as you know, would often have people abandoning the race or staff going home. And so someone once said to me in the peloton that the difference between Team Sky and other cycling teams is that they're prepared to do all of the little things that no one else is prepared to do. Yeah. And when he said that, I thought that's 100% sums up this team, because you might think that actually cleaning a door handle isn't going to make a difference, but of course that could make a massive difference over the course of 3 weeks.
Another example of those small details that can make the difference. We haven't been talking about the evolution that cycling had in terms of including chefs into the staff, and especially in this part of guaranteeing food safety, which is something so basic. We are here, of course, always talking about how diet can improve performance and always thinking towards performance, but the basic stuff, some of the basic stuff have to be accomplished all the time, and food safety might be something that can ruin everything from one moment to another. How important would you say that chefs are, or the inclusion of chefs in pro cycling teams are for all this process?
Yeah, like the carers, I think the chef and the carers together, they're performance staff. People wouldn't see them as performance staff, but in my mind, they're very much performance staff, because they can actually really contribute to performance. Definitely. And a good chef is worth their weight in gold, because don't forget, the riders are on their bike 6 hours every day. They come back in the evening time and they want to sit down and socialise and just enjoy good food. But that food has to be functional, but it also has to taste right. Now, I don't have the skills to do that, as many nutritionists don't have the skills to do that. That's why you employ world-class chefs. And again, at Sky, we were very lucky in that we had, well, in the end, we had 2 fantastic chefs that they just made everyone else's job quite easily, really. It was great to work with those guys.
Yeah, great. Now, switching to something completely different here, James. One of the major developments in cycling technology, and I believe cycling has always been a very data-centric sport, and one of the major developments was that nutritionists working with cyclists may have been using the power meter to estimate total energy expenditure from a specific training or a session or even racing. Did you consider power meter as a useful tool to estimate some energy expenditure during racing?
Yes, absolutely. I think the reason why cycling is such a great sport for a nutritionist and a physiologist to work in is because of the amount of data that you can get every day. Sure. Every revolution of the pedals is monitored and measured. And so from a nutritionist point of view, the fact that you actually know the workload that your athletes are expending every day just allows you to really then tailor your fueling plans, which of course is different from other sports like team sports. It's very hard to predict the energy expenditure every day. Yeah. So that's why I loved it. One of the reasons why I loved it was because I'm a physiologist first and foremost, but then you just have access to that data every day, and you can just provide a much deeper, meaningful level of service, I think.
Definitely. And now that UCI, it's rumored that it's planning on banning the use of power meters during official racing. How do you believe this could affect the sport and eventually the work of the nutritionists?
Yeah, I think it'll get a lot harder without the power meter, and of course you then have to rely more on heart rate and riders' perceptions of the stage and a lot more subjective measures. It will definitely be harder for the nutritionist to work every day without that energy expenditure on the bike, without doubt.
I'm sorry for the interruption, guys, but this is it for part 1. Very soon I will upload part 2, and if you're hearing this far into the future, you can listen to part 2 right away. If not, well, you'll just have to wait a little bit more, but I can promise you that it will be worth the wait. On part 2, we will talk about all the specifics about the Feel for the Work required model and how did James apply it with Team Sky's riders. We'll talk about muscle glycogen assessment, the role of protein in cycling, especially protein on the bike, and we'll go through the details of Chris Froome's victory in stage 19 of the 2018 Giro d'Italia and other interesting stuff that James will kindly share with us. We'll even talk about rice cakes in detail, so stay tuned for part 2. The show notes for this episode are already available on feelthepedal.com, as usual, where you may find more information on this episode, as well as James' social media contacts. For now, it's goodbye, but I promise to be back soon with part 2 of the interview with Dr. James Morton. I am Gabriel Martins, and hope to talk to you soon. Take care.